the last.
Hello, just heard a mic check.
Jackson, what's up?
Yeah.
and a good lieutenant.
Someone saw me on there, so it was pretty cool.
Just doing a quick audio check. Can someone online let us know if you can hear us?
This is Michelle. I can hear you.
Okay, it's 12 o'clock. So we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the Fast Planning Technical Committee meeting. It is Wednesday, December 6th, and 12 o'clock noon. I'm going to start out with introduction of committee members that I see present. We do have a full house today for committee members. So running down the list, I see we have with us Nick Sarnecki, Michelle Benton, Kate Duber, Kevin McKinley, Brett Nelson, Bob Christash, Bill Rogers, Lieutenant Mike Roberts, Jonathan Tardis, Kellen Spillman, RJ Stump, Jacob Toyrick, Danny Wallace, and John Weinberger. The only committee member absent at today's meeting is Justin Burgess. But Justin, if you are in the meeting online, can you let us know that you're here? Okay, that's the only committee member that is absent. For Fast Planning staff, I have myself, Jackson Fox, Olivia Lunsford, Corey Tigliano, and Deborah Todd. And then for guests in our meeting here today, we have Don Galligan, Randy Bailey, Julie Jenkins, Megan Flory, Patrick Gilchrist, and Sarah Shocker. Are there any other guests in the meeting that I didn't announce? Okay, not seeing any, so that's who we have with us today. Let's move on to approval of the December 6th agenda. Do I have a motion on the agenda? All right, thank you, Bill. Is there a second?
This is Michelle. A second.
Thanks, Michelle. Any changes to today's agenda? Hearing none, anyone opposed to approval of the agenda as presented? Okay, hearing none, we'll consider the agenda approved. That takes us to approval of the November 1st and November 8th, 2023 meeting minutes, which are on pages 2 through 15 of the packet. Can I get a motion on the minutes? Thanks, Bill. Is there a second?
This is Michelle. A second.
Okay, any edits to the minutes? Hearing none, anyone opposed to approval of the November 1st and 8th meeting minutes as presented? Okay, hearing no one opposed to consider those approved. We'll move on to committee and working group reports, which begins on page 16 in the packet. I have 2 sets of action items to present to you, one from the policy board meeting on November 15th, and then also a set of action items from a bicycle pedestrian advisory committee meeting that was held on November 30th. So starting off with the policy board action items on page 16, at the top there, the policy board at that meeting was very well attended due to the kind of controversial topic of the amendment to our long-range transportation plan and short-range funding plan to add the Spees Highway to Hot Springs Road Overpass Bridge Replacement Project. I believe the final tally was 68 people in attendance at that meeting. So that's a record we've not seen since the days of debating College Road. But for that particular motion on approving the funding and scope of work to do an amendment to our long-range plan, the policy board decided to not move forward with that amendment at this time. Some discussions at that meeting is that we might consider adding these bridge replacement projects to these plans during our next update cycle, which would begin in 2025. They also approved our metropolitan planning area boundary update contingent upon receiving a letter of support from Eielson Air Force Base. That letter of support has been drafted and is traveling up the ranks for signature. We've not yet received it. We are hoping to receive it by Friday of this week and submit that boundary update to DOT to coordinate with the governor's office for an approval on that boundary update. The policy board also approved our bylaws amendment to add new representatives to the technical committee for the Rural Services Department and Eielson Air Force Base. For those 2 new seats on our technical committee, I'm still waiting to hear back from both Rural Services and Eielson as to which staff member they would like to assign to those seats. My expectation is that we will welcome them to the technical committee in January. And then lastly, they approved our 2024 meeting calendar as we had presented to the technical committee last month. And then the next page is for the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. That group took a fresh look at their roles and responsibilities document and has 2 amendments to propose to the technical committee and policy board for adjustment of term limits and also seat appointments in that committee. And that is an action item for the technical committee today to advance to the policy board. And we will cover that underneath new business item 8C. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions related to those 2 committee reports. Okay, hearing none, let's move on to our public comment period. Is there any member of the public who wishes to provide testimony today for anything not listed as an action item on today's agenda? If so, you can unmute yourself, state your name for the record, and proceed with your testimony. Okay, public comment going once. Going twice. Okay, we'll close the public comment period. Move on to old business, item 7A, the FAST Plan and Public Participation Plan and Title VI Plan updates. This is an action item for the technical committee today, should you choose to make a motion on this. As shown on page 18 in the packet, the Public Participation Plan and Title VI Plan updates to both of those were released for public comment on October 25th. They're available for review and comment on our FAST Planning website. That comment period ends on December 10th. So I believe that's Sunday. Yeah, and so that ends on Sunday. So today is Wednesday, December 6th. So it's about 4 days before the public comment period. But what we wanted to show you is on pages 19 and 20, show you the public comments that we have received to date. I believe all of which led to a minor revision to the public participation plan. None of these comments resulted in a revision to the Title VI plan, but this is a combined spreadsheet that we're tracking here. And I'm going to turn it over to Olivia in just a moment to talk about a few of these comments, but I wanted to address comment number 1 and number 2. These were comments made by the Federal Highway Administration in relation to the required plans section of the public participation plan. And we had presented this to technical last month. We added some language in response to those comments from Federal Highways into the document. We actually added that before we released it for public comment. And we have officially heard back from both Federal Highways and the Federal Transit Administration that they have reviewed that revision to our plan, and they believe that it addresses their comments. New comments that you've not seen before is comments 3 through 6, and so I'll turn it over to Olivia to cover those.
Thanks, Jackson. So for the most part, the comments that we received were ones that were in person in real-time dialogue at the public comment pop-ups that I was hosting. What was that, last month? So we had a public comment pop-up at Black Spruce Brewing and Lat 65 Brewing, mostly because they are 2 businesses that we established relationships with over the summer with our Bike Friendly Businesses program. And then we also had a public comment pop-up that was a little bit longer in duration, and we also offered free food at J.P. Jones Community Center right off of the Blue Line, I think it is. So those were all really effective and just helped us get our face out in the community. But the comments that we received were typically just related to how do you get your news, or what other things are we not thinking of in terms of outreach. And so those are reflected here. And then we do have the 1 email submission comment, which we added language to address that one in our stated strategy section. So routing to specific contacts at large employers that are within the MPA, like Costco and Walmart. So basically getting someone at these larger employers to either sign up for our newsletter or something like that. So we added that email comment, and addressed it in our public participation plan, just in the regular strategy section. And then someone has suggested that we utilize TV news channels, which I cannot agree with more. And originally, when I had come into fast planning, we were looking at it from the angle of creating commercials that were, you know, maybe 30 seconds long, similar to what Max Transit did several years ago with that lumberjack, I think it was. So anyways, we had originally thought about TV in that capacity, but after Corey and I did the IABA home show last year, we did start talking with KTVF, who is present today, by the way, about maybe doing some form of regular spot with the local news channels. And then since we received this comment, even I was contacted to interview about the Winter Maintenance Forum, and then they were also in attendance at the Winter Maintenance Forum. So this comment just kind of, our response to this comment addresses how we are continuing to work towards getting our news onto the local news channels. And our response also highlights that we do send our events and calendar updates to the local news channels as well. We did get a comment about construction being coordinated better, and how that could work. And as we're all aware, there are lots of maintenance authorities that are working together for this effort. So we really had just a conversation about what we've seen and experienced at the table, fast planning, and the way that I addressed the comment was basically just saying we have this dashboard that I have been working on for a while that highlighted the fast planning projects within the metropolitan planning area. But we talked about maybe just expanding that a little bit more, and if we could map out our projects as well as the state's projects and the city's projects, we could maybe see like a visual map of progression, and then maybe that could help in the decision-making process for construction coordination a little bit better. And then coordinate meeting times with youth sports schedules was another comment that we received, and I was really happy to receive that comment because it's really easy in our day-to-day to know what things we need to be considering for our schedules. But not having a child in sports yet, it was a great reminder that, okay, you know, sports schedules, we do already coordinate quite a bit around hunting schedules. So I really appreciated this comment because it encouraged me to add another line item to the survey that we did to get out to the general public on preferred meeting times so that we can change the way that these meetings are hosted so that we can encourage the public to attend more of them. So that concludes my report on comments.
Okay, thanks, Olivia. So again, the public comment period is not over yet. It ends on December 10th on Sunday. I believe Olivia may be doing a kind of a last final push on, at least on social media, to try to get folks to review and provide a comment on this. So it is possible over the next few days we receive a few additional public comments. But again, everything that's come in so far is it's a very short list of comments, but they did result in some minor revisions that that were easy to modify and certainly not controversial in any way. So as an action item today, you know, I'm curious if the technical committee would consider making a motion to recommend that these two plan updates be approved by the board on December 20th, pending receipt and resolution of any additional public comments. So really that's what the action item is about, is kind of a preliminary recommendation to the policy board so that we can get these documents to them on December 20th for their final approval. But before we make any motions, I want to open it up for any questions from committee members, and then we'll do a public comment period before we entertain a motion. So are there any questions?
Right, Kel, just one. Forgive me if you've already mentioned this, Olivia. What's the deadline for getting this to federal highways?
So we promised, we initially suggested by the end of December, but the promise in response to the Federal Transit Administration triennial review was that we would have this in by the end of January.
Okay.
So of course that could be extended with any extenuating circumstances, but right now we're committed to delivering these final products by the end of January. So This does not have to be approved by the board on December 20th if there's any issues with the document. All right, any other questions?
Yeah, this is John Weinberger.
All right, John.
I'm looking at number 6 about coordinating around youth sports schedules, but I've just been a hockey dad for the last decade, and the 6-year-olds skate at, or not, the 8-year-olds boys skate at 5 o'clock, and then 6:15 the 10-year-olds skate, and then 8 o'clock the 16-year-olds are skating. It's all over the board. It's trying to shoot at a dartboard. How to answer that is not. I don't think it's achievable. The girls will have a different schedule than the boys, and it's just so broad spectrum that you can't even dial it in. And I'm just talking about one sport, yet in basketball, and yet in the volleyball. I don't think the request is achievable.
Thanks, yeah, I appreciate that comment. Really, for me, it just is a helpful reminder that there are lots of schedules at play here, and I hadn't even considered sports to be one of them. So really, if I could even just get our event planning in line with peak season for each of these sports, that would be really helpful for us, even if it's just events and not meetings.
If we're seeking an outreach and a marketing thing, setting up a dipper during these sports during practice time could be a thought.
Thank you.
Those are busy places.
Yeah.
Good idea, John. All right, any other questions? Staff on this? Okay, not hearing any. Is there any public comment on this item today? I'm not seeing or hearing any public comment, so we'll close the public comment period. I'll now open the floor for a motion. Should anybody like to make a motion? Go ahead, John.
Make a motion to approve this pending any other comments that come in and send it to policy board.
Okay, thank you, John. That's the targets, by the way, since there's a few Johns in the meeting. Is there a second to that motion?
This is Michelle, a second.
Jacob got it before you did, Michelle, sorry. All right, motion made by John and Tarvis, second by Jacob. All right, discussion on the motion. Yeah, go ahead, Kelly.
I'll just say it seems fine. I reviewed the plan, I think last meeting. It looked good. I think we have a lot of good things in there. Generally, I get a little uneasy with recommending approval of something before the public comment period's over.
Yep.
It could come across as maybe disingenuous with anyone that submits comments after the date, or after the approval date, but still within the public comment date. I'm okay with it on this one, but kind of bigger items like the MTP or the TIP, I think I'd be a little more uneasy about that.
Yep, understood. Go ahead, John.
I guess fast planning, I trust we'll use their better judgment. And if a comment comes in that's controversial or needs more review, that they can bring it back to the committee.
Yep. Okay, any other discussion? Okay, I'm not sensing any differences of opinion or controversy here, so I'm just gonna ask, is there anyone opposed to approval of the motion? And the motion was to recommend that the policy board approve the public participation plan and Title VI plan updates pending resolution of any further public comments received between now and December 10th. So is there anyone
Uh,
opposed to that motion?
John Weinberger votes no because the public comment period is not closed.
Okay, we have one no vote for John Weinberger. Is there any additional no votes? Okay, not seeing any, so the motion carries. And let's move on the agenda to the first item underneath new business, the Fairbanks P 2.5 area air plan partial approval and disapproval by the US EPA, which begins on page 21 in your packet. I hope most folks in the technical committee are aware that the EPA has published in the Federal Register their final action on the partial approval and partial disapproval of the state implementation plan for air quality for our area. What's included in your packet is the EPA's, it's kind of like a press release that summarizes the action that we posted in the Federal Register and provides a link to it, which begins on page 25. This was on page 25. This shows you the PDF version of what the EPA requested to be published in the Federal Register, and I just received this morning the final or the official notice in the Federal Register, which was posted yesterday on December 5th, which is basically a carbon copy of what some of the pages that are included in your packet. My understanding that after this is posted in the Federal Register, there's a 30-day period before this final rule becomes effective, and so the effective date of the final rule has been listed as January 4th, 2024. So that is the date in which our area will have a conformity freeze placed on our local transportation plans. And included, I did some excerpts here on the ramifications regarding transportation conformity, which begins on page 26, the next page in the packet there. This is on page 173 of the Federal Register notice. And I highlighted kind of the pertinent paragraphs, and I'll explain a little bit later kind of what this means. But the final disapproval of this attainment demonstration state implementation plan without a protective finding results in conformity freeze beginning on the effective date of the disapproval. So again, the effective date will be January 4th. And then on the next page, it highlights how the fast planning produces the long-range metropolitan transportation plan and the short-range transportation improvement program. So this is our MTP and our TIP. And during conformity freeze, only projects in the first 4 years of the current conformity and transportation plans may be found to conform. So this would be 2023 through 2026. But I put together a few slides here, which really represents my understanding of what we can do and we can't do during conformity freeze. This begins on the next page, page 28. And I will note that this is the slides here that I put together. This is based on my understanding of reading the regulations, as well as our intergovernmental operating agreement between Fast Planning and the state of Alaska, as well as review of our current policies and procedures on amendments versus, say, admin mods or other minor revisions to our long and short range transportation plans. I have heard from Federal Highways that they're looking at setting up a training for Fast Planning and Alaska DOT staff on what it means for a conformity freeze. So later here this month, my expectation is that I'll have received a training from Federal Highways on this and can, which may lead to some adjustments in what I'm about to present. But so I'm just presenting my understanding at this time. So for the conformity freeze, the date at the top, as of the Federal Register yesterday, this has been updated, but this conformity freeze begins on the effective date of the disapproval, which will be January 4th. So it won't be late December, but it'll be January 4th, 2024. The state, from that point forward, the state has 24 months to correct the deficiencies in the air plan and submit a fully approvable plan. What I've seen through communications from the EPA and the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, it is possible that there's a resubmittal by July of next year. And there's hope that that resubmittal will correct all those deficiencies and will result in a fully approvable plan. So it is, in the best case scenario, I think we will only be underneath a conformity freeze between January and July of 2024. But of course, for a variety of issues that could be extended. But real simply, during a conformity freeze, we cannot undertake any new air quality conformity determinations for our local transportation plans. We can't do any amendments to our local transportation plans. And again, as I mentioned before, only the projects in the first 4 years of our local transportation plans can move forward. So that would be from 2023 to 2026. But if the deficiencies in the air quality plan are not corrected within the next 24 months, so the next 2 years, that at that time, highway sanctions would be imposed and we would have a conformity lapse on our local transportation plans. So this would be 2 years out in the future if those deficiencies are not resolved. And at that time, only our air quality exempt projects can move forward. So these would be safety projects, transit projects that are beneficial to air quality and are in planning and studies. Okay, so a few more slides here, just to refresh everybody's memory on these. When I talk about our local transportation plan on the next slide, page 29, these are the two documents that I'm referencing. Our 20-year long-range transportation plan, which we commonly refer to as our MTP, and then our 4-year short-range funding plan, which we commonly refer to as our TIP. Both of these documents were approved by our policy board in March of 2023, and both of these documents were subject to a regional air quality emissions analysis and conformity determination, which that conformity determination was granted jointly by the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration in May of 2023. So just a few months ago. So at least our plans are up to date and fresh at this time. Page 30 shows you in our MTP. Again, it's every transportation project in which federal highway funding is invested within our boundary. So this includes a combination of both, fast planning projects, projects that we fund with our allocation of federal dollars, as well as all of the DOT projects within our boundary, which is generally on the highway system, for which federal highway dollars are being spent on. And then in that plan, of course, as shown on page 31 as an example, accompanying those maps has our short, medium, and long-range project lists, which again, in this long-range planning document includes all of our personal projects and fast planning, as well as all of the non-fast planning projects, which is primarily state DOT projects, again, on the highway system. So for this document on page 32, we do have an intergovernmental operating agreement between fast planning and the state of Alaska. And so here's an excerpt about amendments and administrative modifications to our MTP and our TIP and what triggers those. I mean, really I shared this with you all during our last meeting, but in general for our MTP and TIP, an amendment is triggered with the addition or deletion of projects, changes in project initiation dates, major changes in project costs, changes in design concept and scope, et cetera. So that's what an amendment is. And then for administrative modifications, it's kind of the opposite end of the threshold where it's minor changes versus major changes. So obviously there's a lot of flexibility in the interpretation of each one of these, but amendments do have to be released for a 30-day public comment period. Administrative modifications do not. They simply go through our technical committee and policy board. So page 33, to line this out a little bit cleaner. So for revisions to our long-range transportation plan, what we cannot do during conformity freeze, we cannot add or remove projects. So, as we discussed last month, beginning January 4th, we can't add the 2 proposed bridge replacement projects into this plan during the conformity freeze. We can't alter the original project intent, design, scope, concept, or purpose and need of the projects that are listed in this plan. We cannot do a major change in project initiation date, say, moving a project to the long range category, which would be 10 plus years out, move that into the short range category. We can't entertain a major change in project cost that requires demonstration of fiscal constraint. One example where this may impact DOT here is the Steese Johansson interchange project. In our current MTP, we have the estimate from DOT being $56 million And the latest estimate that we saw in the draft STIP was 108 million. So as that project moves forward, we will have far exceeded our fiscal constraint for this document. So if additional funding is approved for the East Johansson interchange, that will require an amendment to this local transportation plan to add an additional $52 million to that project and re-demonstrate fiscal constraint for that entire document for the short range category. So that has a potential impact. The conformity freeze has a potential impact on that particular project. And then of course, any revision that triggers an air quality conformity reevaluation. But what we can do on the right-hand side for positive notes, minor changes to project initiation date, say, advancing the project from the medium range category to the short range, a minor change in project cost that again does not exceed our fiscal constraint. And we can proceed towards implementation of projects that are considered exempt for air quality. So these are, say, safety projects like funded underneath the Highway Safety Improvement Program, but also underneath this regulatory citation here, it also includes pavement resurfacing. So this would be like DOT's preventative maintenance program, as well as a fast planning, our fast improvement program. Of course, we can move forward with transit related projects, and we can move forward with projects that have direct benefit to air quality. So our projects that we fund with CMAQ and carbon reduction program dollars, as long as we can demonstrate a reduction in vehicle emissions as a result of those projects. And then the last one is other projects that do not involve or lead directly to construction. So our ongoing planning efforts here at Fast Planning and any other technical studies that we undertake. So, and this also includes planning funds for operation of our office, so we can still move forward with all those. Okay, page 34 shows you our short range funding plan. This is just a snapshot of one of the pages. So again, this is our funding plan for all of the federally funded transportation projects within our boundary. And that was just approved back in March of 2023. On page 35, we do have a policy on revisions to this document that covers minor revisions and then thresholds for administrative modifications versus amendments. Again, amendments have to go out for a 30-day public comment period, and during conformity freeze, that column on the right, those are all the actions there that we cannot do. But we can do everything in the first two columns, we just can't do anything in the far right column. So to summarize this, just like I did for the MTP on page 36, I'm showing what we cannot do with regard to our TIP. So we cannot add or remove projects. We can't add or remove project phases for planning, design, and construction. We cannot alter the original project intent or purpose and need of those projects. We can't have any revisions that trigger an air quality conformity reevaluation. For a project that we're designing and moving forward to construction, we can't increase or decrease the length of that project by greater than 30%. And for small projects that are under $3 million in cost, we can't approve cost increases that equal or that are greater than 50% of that project cost or greater than 1 million. And for larger projects that are over $3 million in costs, we can't approve cost increases that are greater than 30% of the project or 1.5 million. So this can really hamstring our ability to be flexible with revisions to say, the engineer's estimate of DOT for a project that we thought would be, 2.5 million, but the latest estimate now says it's going to be 4 million. We can run into an issue with that. And unfortunately, that's been kind of a common occurrence the last couple of years, especially with bid prices that have been coming back and then, revised estimate based on the latest bid prices. We cannot exceed our use of advanced construction for greater than 50% of the federal program. And we can't add federal funding to a project that currently does not have federal funding. So we do have a couple illustrative projects in our TIP right now. So we would not have the ability to add federal funding to those projects. So they're frozen in time as illustrative during the conformity freeze. What we can do is we can add or update project numbers, need IDs, simple things. We can split projects into phases or combine projects. We can add or remove project phases specific, but only for right-of-way and utilities. Since those are a little bit, they kind of pop up and go away depending on the circumstances with the project. We can shift funding for project phases between fiscal years. This one here is extremely important to us because two projects in particular go into construction in 2024, which is the Chena Riverwalk and Yankovich Miller Hill. It's possible that those projects may not go to construction until 2025. There may be a delay in the schedule of those. So this will be an important one that during the conformity freeze, we're gonna have to verify with Federal Highways, but I believe that we can shift those project funds out 1 year if there's a delay in the design or right-of-way acquisition schedule. But that one needs some confirmation. We can update project titles and description as long as they don't alter the original project scope or purpose and need. We can change funding type for a singular project phase as long as that funding source is already in our TIP. We can increase or decrease project length as long as it's under 30%. And then for projects under $3 million, we can approve cost increases as long as they're under 50% of the total project cost or under 1 million. And then for projects over 3 million, we can approve cost increases that are under 30% or under 1.5 million. But this last one that's in our policy and procedure, this is also an important one here. We can approve time-sensitive cost increases required to award a consultant or construction contract regardless of amount. So if an engineer's estimate comes back, says, hey, we need another 1.5 million for that project, we may not be able to approve that, but if it does go out to bid and the bids come back in, DOT does have a certain contractual obligation to award that contract unless we simply don't have the money. But this one's a little bit dangerous as well, because if we have a large cost increase as a result of a bid, we've got to have that money available somewhere to be able to award that contract. And if grabbing that money from another project that's unrelated to it, which is what we commonly do to fully fund that construction contract, we might be beyond the threshold of changing another project, which would require an amendment, which we cannot do. So this is a good thing down here for some flexibility, but it's also leads me to believe that we may have some difficulty in actually executing that task because the money's got to come from somewhere. Okay, so really that kind of wraps up, again, my understanding of the impact of this conformity freeze for how we operate with our local transportation plans. I was not intending to go into detail today about what parts of the airplan were approved or disapproved and go into that detail. I really just want to talk about the conformity freeze. But I see that Nick Zarnecki has his hand up, and I'd like to invite him to provide any additional information or clarification that he chooses. So Nick, you've got the floor.
All right, thank you, Jackson, and excellent presentation talking about the impacts of conformity freeze on the community. So thanks for putting that together. I just had one point of clarification back on page 28 of the packet with the conformity freeze schedule. And I could be wrong in this because this does get very difficult to interpret, but the second bullet there where you have the state has 24 months to correct the SIP deficiencies, which is true, and that we are working on schedule to get a SIP submission in July of 2024. I don't think the conformity freeze gets lifted until EPA fully approves the SIP submission that the state submits. And so that would put best case scenario at about 2 years instead of 6 months under the conformity freeze. Because once the state submits it to EPA, then statutorily they have 18 months to put a final action out on that plan. Hopefully EPA will move faster than that, but that's how much time that they would have under the Clean Air Act.
Thank you for that clarification, Nick. So I'll add a new bullet number 3 that describes that. So but what I heard is that even if DEC turns in the new air plan by July of 2024, the EPA still has that remaining 18 months to produce their decision on that document.
Correct,
So
to review it.
be in a conformity freeze for up to 2 years. That's a
Correct.
reasonable expectation, okay.
Yeah, that's my understanding. And then we could reach out to EPA to get concurrence on that.
Thank you, that is really helpful for all of us. I didn't realize that, and it just makes the situation worse, but okay. Or- Go ahead, Kellen.
Question for Nick, if I may. Nick, did I hear you correctly? You said best case scenario, we're talking 24 months?
Yeah, Kellen, I think that's correct because we're working as quickly as possible to get that SIP revision in. July of 2024 would be the earliest, and then EPA has 18 months to act on that and to get the final decision out, and that would put us at 24 months. It might be a little bit shorter than that if we can work with EPA to condense that timeline, which obviously we will. But I think for planning purposes, that's a good target.
Go ahead, Kellen.
Does that impact your analysis here?
Yep. I'll have to look at additional projects beyond 2024. So now this presentation that I just did on these few slides, I've been asked to present this to the Chamber's Transportation Committee tomorrow morning. I've also been asked to present this to the Borough Assembly. I think it's on January 4th. So as I learn more, my presentation will be modified. And again, I believe there will be a training session with Federal Highways, the Resource Center, later here in December. And so as I learn more, I'll continue to update this. So this is my first run at sharing with you all what we're looking at. And unfortunately, it's a little bit more bleak than what I just described.
So,
And-
this is Brett. So what you laid out, Nick, was the worst, best case scenario. So, are you planning to follow up with EPA to confirm that? I mean, or does someone else need to, or is that something that you can do for Jackson, for us?
I mean, this is Nick, I could initiate that email, and Jackson has a lot of the same contacts. There's a new EPA Region 10 Transportation Conformity person, Tess Bloom. Jackson and I were both on a conference call with her last week. And so we can, as soon as this is over, I can initiate that question and clarification and get that out to the EPA Region 10 folks.
Good, thanks, because I believe that'd be an important piece of information, because when people see, could be as early as July 2024, that's what people are stick with, but not without having a fine print that you just mentioned, so I appreciate that.
The slide will be modified. Thank you, Nick, for bringing that to all of our attention. That was a very important element. I need a vacation.
18-month vacation?
2 years.
Go ahead.
I have a couple other questions. Do you mind if I invite myself to that FHWA training?
No, no problem at all. No.
A couple more, if I may.
Yep.
And feel free to defer to Nick if that's more appropriate.
Sure.
I have a really hard time reading these Federal Registry postings. I was trying to read it today, and I just want to make sure I'm reading this right. Let me find my window here. It was regarding the ultra low sulfur diesel finding by the EPA. And I don't have it in front of me right now, but I'm going to do my best to summarize what the Federal Registry said. I believe it said, we essentially accept your proposal not to implement the ultra low sulfur diesel regulation that was originally proposed.
That's my understanding as well. And that was in one of the EPA press releases that that won't be a requirement on our community.
Okay. I want to double check that, because I think
That's a-
that would have the most
That's
impact.
a significant win.
Okay. And then maybe a question you don't know the answer to right now with this new information Nick brought up. As far as project estimates in terms of money and time, for I guess now this 24 months. I guess how good do we feel about what's in the tip compared to, bids coming in high, projects slipping, et cetera?
I don't feel good about it. Many of the estimates that our tip is based on are, those were done last year. And so we haven't even captured what the bid prices were this spring and updated those. So, potentially, if we can't, afford a large increase for the project of scope, we may have to reduce the scope slightly to try to fit it within the amount that we have. So it's just gonna be difficult in case by case basis there. All right, Nick, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I do. In response to Kellen, your question, you are absolutely correct, as Jackson noted, that the ULSD mandate is not a requirement at this time. That EPA concurred with the state of Alaska's finding that it's economically infeasible to adopt that as a control measure in the community right now. However, within the disapproval, EPA also disapproved the state of Alaska's contingency measures, and EPA further stated that they believe that ultra-low sulfur diesel is a measure that should be considered for a contingency, which would mean that if the state would adopt it as a contingency measure and we had an attainment date of, say, 2028 that we didn't meet, then it would go into effect immediately upon finding that we didn't attain by that date if that happened. And so while it's off the books for now, I did want to highlight that it's still a matter of contention that the state is going to be dealing with in this next revised SIP amendment.
Thank you, Nick. Sorry, Colin.
You referred to that as a contingency measure?
Correct.
All right, any other comments, questions, discussion? This is not an action item here today. It's just an update, and I'm assuming this will stay on the agenda for next month, as we all learn more, and I can adjust my documentation of, again, what we can do and what we can't do during conformity freeze.
Right, one more question, if I may, maybe for DOT, John or Brett. I assume all of these same mandates take place in the quote unquote donut area outside of fast planning's boundary, but inside the PM 2.5 non-attainment area. Is that correct?
I was thinking about that myself, and I'm not sure. Because the donut area we refer to is within the PM 2.5 area, but outside of the MTO. So that would have to be explored. I mean, our understanding, just general understanding is that these are pertaining, the mandates from my understanding pertain to the MTP and TIP, but we'll have to do some more investigation, and that would be part of the training in federal highways.
Okay.
But right now, I don't think what's being specified is relative to MTP and TIP directly, which is a huge impact to either way, but I think the question is those projects in a donut hole, how are they affected? That has to be explored a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, last call for comments or questions. Like we need a birthday cake for next meeting. when this takes effect. Somehow mark the event.
Get their
Features
when it's lifted.
Okay, all right, well, let's move on the agenda then to item 8B, under new business, the regional long-range transportation plan scope of work. Begins on page 37 in the packet. The action item here today is to consider this letter request and a draft scope of work and planning level estimate to request some funding from the Alaska DOT for development of the first long-range transportation plan for 16 rural communities that are located within the borough, but outside of our boundary. So in general, that's what this letter request says on page 37. For a little bit more background here, previously the technical committee of policy board saw our request to DOT to use some of the $3.8 million in unobligated planning fund balance that DOT has at its disposal to award to the MPOs in the state for different planning efforts. That proposal we submitted for that specific funding source was rejected by DOT. And the reason that it was rejected was that really the only organization or only pilot regional planning organization in the state that has access to that money is Fast Planning. And that seems unfair to the other pilot regional planning organizations in the state. So I'm advancing a request to use an alternative funding source at DOT's discretion. DOT could potentially use surface transportation program dollars for this, or they could use some of the statewide planning funds that they have at their disposal for their annual work program. So there are a variety of funding sources that DOT has at its disposal to fully fund this effort. But as part of this request, I wanted to take the detail a bit further and actually draft a scope of work for what we're requesting, as well as produce a planning level estimate for what it will cost for a consultant to assist us with this plan, what it will cost for Fast Planning staff to manage that project and participate in that project. Because if we work on a plan like this that is outside of our boundary, we cannot use our MPO planning funds to participate in that work. So we will need additional funding for our organization that is eligible for use outside of the boundary. But then also part of this funding request asks for funding for DOT staff to administer the contract and also participate in this planning effort. So I'll introduce the scope of work first and then show you the planning level estimate that I prepared. The scope of work begins on page 38. As I stated, kind of the purpose of this planning effort is to develop that first long-range transportation plan for the 16 rural communities that you see listed here that are located within the borough, but outside of our urbanized area boundaries, so outside of Fairbanks and North Pole. The idea is that this plan will develop an outline of short, medium, and long-range transportation priorities and projects for all of those communities and their road networks. And that, once that plan has been established, that we at Fast Planning will utilize that long-range plan to apply for funding through the STIP for, say, community transportation program dollars or transportation alternative program dollars from the state to fund some of those projects, as well as apply for other discretionary state and federal grant programs. For this type of planning effort, of course, we have a plan format for our MTP or our long range plan for the urbanized area. But there really is no specific format that these plans have to follow in coordination with federal regulations, and the state of Alaska has not yet established state statutes that cover regional planning organizations or regional planning activities. So the consultant definitely has some flexibility in the plan format and content. On the next page, I'm proposing that as part of this planning effort, we establish a steering committee with representatives from multiple borough departments, community planning, rural services, parks and rec, and school district, multiple DOT departments, from planning to pre-construction to maintenance and operations, the Alaska Department of Natural Resources, since there's a lot of state land in and around these rural communities. An example would be the Chena River State Recreation Area. Max Transit, the Fairness Economic Development Corporation, Eielson Air Force Base, emergency response service providers. So folks from, that drive ambulances and respond to all kinds of different emergencies, fire trucks, state troopers. And then other kind of interested local agencies or organizations as appropriate. I thought it would be interesting on the steering committee to have somebody that provides a delivery service for, say, water or home heating oil, or even mail or package delivery. Some of those small freight providers that experience challenges on some of this rural road network with regard to the infrastructure that's there, potentially substandard roads, lack of maintenance, et cetera. And so once we have a steering committee, the vision is that that committee would meet every other month for approximately a year, working through the plan development. The one thing that's new here that we've just started doing is these pop-up events. Our vision is that as this plan is developed, we would do a bit of a roadshow and travel to each of these rural communities and host a pop-up open house event at a community center or an area restaurant or a bar or a community park during the summertime to get feedback from area residents on what type of local transportation improvements that they would like to see in their area. And that during the planning effort, we would interface with the Borough Planning Commission at least 2 times, first at the project outset, but then also presentation of the draft plan. So there's opportunity for public comment. But as this plan gets developed, we would run it through the technical committee and policy board for approval. And this is I think that really the future vision is to kind of have a rural policy committee, another committee for fast planning. That's not yet been established, but perhaps through this planning process, we can identify some of those community leaders in these rural communities that would be willing to join a policy committee as we work on trying to fund these projects. So I have a list there of all the pop-up events and potential locations that we're considering. For existing conditions, this is kind of a big task for the consultant to look at the infrastructure condition of all those roadways, traffic count data as is available through DOT. For this, the assumption is that we wouldn't actually do travel demand modeling. That's something that we do for the urbanized area. And in these rural communities, it really is a small populations and their road network is a lot simpler. So we would really just be relying on traffic count data as opposed to doing a travel demand modeling effort. But we would like the consultant to prepare maps for the entire transportation network in each of these communities, showing the maintenance authority for each of the roadways, whether that's DOT or say the Borough School District or Parks and Rec or DNR or federal or military, and what's in the road service area and what's not in the road service area, meaning there is no maintenance authority for that road. We also want to have information about facility type, whether the road's paved or gravel, whether it's up to standard or is substandard. And we do have, some information at our fingertips to feed into this plan. So I've got a list between this page and the next page of locally adopted plans that could be relied on for information for this effort. And then for the needs analysis, we would have a consultant team, through that existing conditions that they, through their research and all of the public input that we received to date from area residents and other stakeholders, that we would identify the current and future needs by travel mode and start to develop a candidate list of projects, programs, and policies to identify those needs. And then for through screening of projects, looking at cost, eligibility, who might sponsor those projects, say who might pay to match those projects, and how feasible they are to implement, that ultimately this plan would score and prioritize those projects. And on the next page, categorize that prioritized list into a short, medium, long range priorities, and develop a financial plan to pursue and secure funding for those short and medium range projects. Again, there won't be an allocation of funding to actually build these projects, so it'll be an application process through fast planning to petition the state to fund some of them through the STIP, as well as for fast planning to apply for discretionary grants to take care of some of the highest priority projects that come out of this planning effort. And then lastly, drafting policy recommendations for local government consideration. And that may relate to, say, road service area consolidation or other issues that come up during the planning effort. For my estimate, that's on page 42. I'm estimating this across those 6 tasks if we hire a consultant team to perform this work. I think the contract over approximately 1.5 years to complete this would cost about $300,000. Fast planning staff participation in this would be about $70,000. And then for DOT's oversight and participation, which is more limited than fast planning staff, about $30,000. So in total, the request is for $400,000, which matches the same amount that we had requested from DOT using the unobligated PL balance a couple months ago. So again, this is an action item here today for the technical committee to consider recommending that the board approve this letter request for funding and the scope of work and the planning level estimate to advance forward to DOT. So I'll answer questions. Brett, you got yours up first. We'll get to John.
Oh, go ahead, John.
Sure, John first. Go ahead.
On the total tally on page 42, why is the indirect cost negative?
So when we have the federal money and we do the 9% match contribution, then ICAP is deducted from that.
Okay.
So we're actually asking for more than $400,000 because ICAP is taken away. And the current rate is 6.35%. So we need $400,000 plus 6.35%. So it's just showing that there. And last thing I did want to mention here is that in my communications with both Mayor Ward and Savannah Fletcher, which is the presiding officer on the assembly right now, the expectation is that the match for this planning effort will be paid for by the Ferguson Star Borough. So that will not be a surprise in the next policy board.
So the total amount you're requesting would be 427,000 or so?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
We need the math to work out, so we got 400 that we can actually use.
Yep.
All right, other questions?
I mean, I guess I have some discussion things. I mean, as far as, because I was looking into this and I was at a meeting yesterday, a division meeting with statewide planning. So I did, because I'm relatively new to the planning world and trying to figure things out and don't have a lot of experience, although I am starting to work with other RPOs. There's a few other RPOs that are kind of just getting out the ground. The one that's farthest along is the Copper River Valley RPO, and they've been hitting the ground running, and they've acquired some additional funding for setting up their RPO. But it just last week, the Kenai Peninsula had a meeting with DOT to set up and get the RPO going down in Kenai Peninsula, and Northwest Arctic Borough already had an agreement. And now they have a new planning director, and they're looking to advance their RPO now, getting going. So basically, the long answer or the long discussion point short is that there's not readily available, identifiable money in the STIP currently, but there is, and it is in the cooperative agreement, and it is in the annual work plan for planning that there are funds of $30,000, annual and which is a small amount, but it's a start, and that's for all the RPOs as they get more and more spun up. So basically, I think this, this looks good, and there's a lot of good points in here, but I don't think if this went forward, it would just be, there isn't that money, there isn't $400,000, laying around available. So I think this is it's a good start for discussion to identify, and work with the state, because we want, RPOs to succeed, and, it's definitely a need. But I think, we're just gonna have to have this discussion go forward, and how are these gonna work? Because it does say in the cooperative agreement that the state will pitch in and work with the RPOs to, make resources available. And so this would be, an ask.
Yep.
Saying this is a, identified local need and this is what, research put together, so. So that part I think is important, but I just want to say too, it might not get anywhere real fast, so, which I'm sure you're aware.
Yep, no, I'm very well aware of that. I mean, the draft STIP is still under development.
Right.
And so really what we're looking for, and I asked a few months ago, is that there is a new project in the STIP that provides this additional funding for all the RPOs in the state. My suggestion was, let's fund a new project in the STIP at $1 million per year, such that is when RPOs are ready to do their initial planning task, which is the first long-range plan for their area, that there's funding available in the STIP for that use. Because our cooperative agreement clearly states that DOT will provide compensation for the work tasks once that's mutually agreed upon. So beyond that $30,000 investment, but the $30,000 investment that we have gets you the amount of work that's in this packet. It doesn't go very far.
Correct. Yeah.
So, so there has to be a funding mechanism to the state, if the state wants RPOs to be successful, to fund at a minimum their first long-range transportation plan. So, because again, the money that we have access to can only be spent within our boundary. Can't
Right,
participate
and you
in this,
correctly
we
identified
can't
it.
participate in this work unless we have money through the STIP that is eligible for use outside of our boundary. So, I'm pushing this forward as a continuation of the conversation with DOT. Put it that way.
And as another avenue, we do have the statewide MPO meetings, which is an RPO meeting, but it's MPO, and some of that discussion can come up there too, because I did talk to statewide. And there is an identified need, like you said.
Yep.
But we just haven't figured out how it's gonna work yet, so.
Yeah, I don't expect to get this money for a year or more. And we may never get it, but if we want to move forward with this RPO model, that's at some point, the state's got to come to the table with some funds to assist. Because really these RPO areas, I mean, they're going to struggle to even come up with a 9% match for these funds, so.
And then I did have a question too on the list of 16 communities. I mean, that, I was wondering about Moose Creek and Eielson.
Yep.
Would the proposed MPO boundary change affect
So
these? Because they'd be theoretically then within the MPO.
in our RPO implementation plan, we had those listed because they were not yet within our boundary.
Right.
Now they are in our boundary, but we've never done any planning work for them.
Mhm.
So the idea would be is that underneath this effort, we would include both Moose Creek and Eielson Air Force Base to kind of get some of that initial planning work done that'll feed into our next MTP for the urban area. With me, because that plan and effort won't start till 2025. But I think that this plan should document some of the preliminary transportation needs for those two areas. So I left them in here, but you could argue that they should be deleted as well. Other questions?
So I'm just trying to think if there's other questions. Yeah, I'm just on, my understanding of RPOs and as we're working forward, since it's a pilot, we're not sure how they're gonna work and how advanced everything's gonna roll and how fast things are gonna roll out, so. Yes, I understand. I understand the ask and the proposal, because you have to do things to keep things moving, get things moving. So just being realistic or pragmatic.
I guess one additional comment is that at fast planning, if we're awarded this funding and move forward, I mean, we will in effect be the first pilot RPO to complete a long range plan for a rural area. So you know, that produces, just like in the packet here, a template for a scope of work for this type of a planning effort, roughly what costs there will be, what the actual costs are once you get through the planning effort, and then what the kind of format of that long-range plan might look like for other regions in the state. So I mean, to have all of those resources available to the other RPOs in the state, someone's got to do the first one. And so that as they're developed, statewide, each RPO kind of has a consistent format for how this process and what these documents will look like. So we're willing to be the guinea pig, so to speak, if funding to the STIP can be approved. But this is just, I'm hoping that this just gets advanced as an official request. The understanding that there'll be lots more conversations with DOT on whether or not this funding can be made available. All right, any other questions? So. Other questions? No. Okay, let's move on to the public comment period. Is there any public comment on this action item here today? One online? Okay, not seeing any public comment online or in person. So we'll close the public comment period. So I'm now looking for a motion. Any technical committee member like to make a motion on this item? Kellen, go ahead.
I'll recommend approval of the consideration funding request to DOT and scope of services for the long-range transportation plan for 16 rural communities outside the MPA to the policy board.
Thank you, Kellen. Is there a second? Jacob has the second. All right, further discussion. Go ahead, Kellen.
I have a couple of suggestions on the scope of work.
Sure.
You let me know, I'll maybe go through them and you let me know if you think a motion is necessary or not.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm looking at task 2 right now.
Yep.
I would recommend including in the steering committee, and I'll just preface all this by saying, we've formed some similar planning efforts.
Yep.
Outside of designated cities, et cetera, and often find it a little hard to get representation from the community with no community councils, hard to identify members of the public, et cetera. One model we have found successful is in making steering committees similar to this, approaching rural service area chair people or representatives from that actual service area.
So RSA commissioners?
Exactly.
Okay.
So I would recommend that. I feel that very different than just kind of staff at the borough or staff at DOT, et cetera. They know the neighbors, they talk intimately with the neighbors based on maintenance needs, et cetera. So I found that pretty successful.
Okay. I mean, just handling this one real quick, I'm assuming there's no objections from the committee to adding road service area commissioners to the list of folks to be on the steering committee. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone opposed, so we'll just consider that administrative provision. Okay.
The other one I'm looking at is task 3 now. My recommendation would be to specifically call out and have the consultant look into and discuss in this needs and in the existing conditions, the borough subdivision process and subdivision regulations. Because just to expound on that a little bit, that's actually how most of these roads in these areas are built, is through the subdivision process and through the required exactions by the planning board during that subdivision process. So I think it'd be good for the consultant to look at that as part of the existing conditions.
So to clarify, are you asking the consultant team to look at that to provide policy recommendations?
Not at this point, but to
No.
just call that out in the existing conditions
Okay.
report.
Any objection from technical committee members for me to add a sentence describing that? Okay. We'll add that.
And then my final recommendation, I'm not sure if it most appropriate in task 5 or task 6. And I'll preface this first. I really think the biggest hang up of this plan is gonna be maintenance. That I would venture to say 50 to 75% of the road miles in this area don't have a maintenance authority. So we're gonna go through a big process. We're gonna have a lot of recommendations for roads, possibly or potentially that don't have a maintenance authority. And that's just dead on arrival when it comes to getting federal funding for that. You don't have a maintenance agreement, you don't get federal funding. So I don't want to put a ton of effort into, identifying these specific roads with a kind of do not pass go sign when they start to apply for things. So I really think a recommendation, I would say a look and a recommendation when it comes to the challenges we're experiencing with maintenance, and a recommendation for getting a maintenance authority over a lot of these roads, whether that's a service area or some other option I'm not considering. But that would be my recommendation, to have that as a consideration of this plan, rather than just adding kind of a bunch of roads that are, again, a do not pass go because of that maintenance consideration.
I think as part of the needs analysis, I can add a bullet about the challenges of maintenance and lack of maintenance authorities. And then in task 5, and then in task 6, add another bullet about recommendations specifically for that issue. So I think that's really good. So any objections to adding the bullet to task 5 and 6 related to the challenges with maintenance and lack of maintenance authorities?
You want me to make a motion, just put on the record?
I don't think so. And I think I can sufficiently come up with some language for that. So. And just about all of our planning efforts, that becomes a hot topic at the end of the day. Yep. Okay,
Question
ahead, Brett.
on the budget as far as staff time, fast planning staff and DOT oversight staff time.
Yep.
So if like fast planning staff that funding would be for, for work, outside the MPO for this work on this, offsetting, current staff funding, and same thing with DOT, because DOT, you wouldn't get additional staff, you just have people work on it.
correct. Yeah.
So,
I mean, the idea is in a future conversation is that if we really get this RPO model off the ground, our plan is to hire another staff member of fast planning to be a rural transportation planner. That's the ultimate goal. But at this time, I'm looking at utilizing existing staff resources for this. So it would reduce the pressure on our metropolitan planning funds, because part of our day we'll be working on this plan. So which could lead to, as most technical committee members should be aware, we borrow $100,000 per year of surface transportation program dollars, so project money, to fully fund our office. So if we had funding like this, it would reduce the amount of project money that we would need to operate our office. So on the budget side, we can give some project money back and utilize this money to do the actual planning work, which I think our board would very much appreciate. And that would be a administrative modification to our tip to show that. All right, further discussion. All right, I'm not seeing any further discussion. Just for the fun of it, let's do a roll call so people can vote individually. All right, we're gonna start out with Nick Zarnecki. Go ahead.
what's your proposal for what are we voting on?
The motion that was made. You want to repeat the motion?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Hold on a second. Okay, so the motion was to recommend the policy board advance the funding request to DOT for development of a long-range transportation plan for 16 rural communities outside fast planning's metropolitan planning area boundary. So that's the motion. Okay. Starting out at the top, in alphabetical order of last name. So Nick Zarnecki,
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
Kate? Kate Lee?
So.
Okay, so for the record, Kate Weaver has left the meeting, so we'll move on to Kevin McKinley.
Yes.
Brett?
I'll have to say no.
Okay.
But can I qualify it? Is
You
it,
don't need to
I
qual-
think,
you don't
no,
need to
that's
qualify unless
okay.
you want to like abstain. But you want to abstain or do you want to say no?
Well, let me just say it's hard for me to vote yes on stuff that is also part of my job that I can work on, like when I leave here. So I agree with a lot of this, what's going on, but it's just hard for me to vote for, like, even though I'm part of this board, part of the committee, or not the board, part of the committee. This is information, that's useful to me to take back within my division, because the letter would go to our division director. So I can work on this in other channels too. So I appreciate all this effort, and I think it may come to that, but I would like to work on it internally too, first, before this comes up. Anyhow, that's why I
Your
say
vote no
no.
or an abstention?
I should say no.
Just kind of as a point of order, we shouldn't really be like discussing why we're voting. We should have had that discussion before we vote, but that's
Okay,
okay.
I'm sorry, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyway, just for clarification on future action items, but,
Mhm.
so we'll count you as a no vote at this
Okay.
time. Okay, sounds good. So, Bob Christash,
Yes.
Bill Rogers,
Yes.
and I believe for the record, Lieutenant Mike Roberts has left. Okay. John Charles,
Yes.
Kellen. Yes. Art Daystump,
Yes.
Jacob. Yes. Danny
Yes.
and John Weinberger.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. Motion carries. We'll take that to the policy board for discussion on December 20th. All right, let's see here. Moving on then to our next action item, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee roles and responsibilities. This begins on page 43 in your packet. This is real simple here. The Bike and Ped Advisory Committee last month, it was actually just last week, on November 30th, they took a look at their roles and responsibilities document, and they had 2 revisions to propose. One of there's really 2 issues that have come up with the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee over the last few months. One is related to term limits. Nathan Bells had served on this committee for a total of 6 years from up at the university, and he got termed out and lost his seat on the committee despite his many years chairing that committee and his interest in continuing to serve on the committee. We've also over time lost John Stoneman, who was with Fair Bikes here, and Bud Cruisley, which sat in the North Pole seat for a number of years. So due to term limits, we lost folks on this committee that had interest in continuing to serve and were a big value to this committee. I did discuss that issue with our policy board chair, Mayor Ward, and he asked that I bring forward a proposal to remove the term limits from this committee. And so that was the original task. But another issue came up with the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, that there are 2 seat vacancies on the committee that have not been filled in a number of years. The first seat is for the city of North Pole. That seat has been vacant since February of 2020. So it's been vacant for 3.5 years, and despite repeated attempts through Mayor Welch to get a seat appointment, we still do not have a seat appointment there. And then for one of the state of Alaska seats, one of those seats has been vacant since February of 2022, so the last 1.5 years. And that was a seat that was held by Carl Heim at DOT. So, and again, we're struggling to get the DOT Northern Region Director to appoint someone to that seat. So you see the language at the bottom here that we came up with at the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee meeting last week. To add some language that if a nominated agency seat remains vacant without selection for 3 consecutive meetings, so it's basically 90 days, then Fast Planning staff may appoint an interim committee member to that seat until such time an appointment is made by that nominated agency. We do have a line of people that would like to serve on this committee. And those names have been advanced to both the city of North Pole and the state of Alaska. But there's no willingness at this time to appoint those two seats. So this would allow fast planning staff to fill those seats in an interim capacity until that nominated agency would like to appoint a member. And then on the next page, page 44, at the suggestion of Mayor Ward, as well as the committee, this would in effect remove the term limits for those seats so that committee members could serve as long as they desire, and we don't lose important members on the committee. And then the only other information in your packet is page 45, which shows you the current roster, the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. As you can see here, there's 2 seats appointed by the city of Fairbanks mayor. So that's Jim Richardson and Larry Zervos that serve in that, citizen members. And then the North Pole seat continues to be vacant since February 2020. For the borough, those 2 seats are filled by Matt Laurel and Susan Bissell. And then for State of Alaska, we have Ron Davis in 1 seat, but another seat that's vacant. And then for the 2 seats that fast planning staff get to appoint, we have Travis Nybert and Kim Streeter in those seats. And it shows you when their terms will expire, whether or not they're serving a first term or they're in their second and final term. But if you go back to page 43, see if there's any questions on these 2 revisions to the roles and responsibilities document. Yes, Kellen.
One question, the interim representative that FAST would appoint, does that have to be confirmed by the policy board?
That's not what the language states, I don't believe. So it's good for the policy board chair. So yeah, we would advance a memo to the board chair to share with the policy board on the seat appointments and ask if there's any objections.
Okay.
Other questions? John?
Has BPAC been reaching out to DOT to fill their seat? Or I sit on this board, yet I don't recall needing to communicate that to anyone.
I have been personally reaching out to Mayor Welch and the Northern Region Director Joe Kemp to fill these seats and provided them with letters of interest from candidates.
I could help,
So-
so what I'm saying too.
Yeah, I wasn't aware either. So yeah, couldn't get the letters of interest then.
I don't believe the Northern Region Director is interested in appointing another seat at this time. I have a lot of communications that I can share with you, but I don't think there's interest at this time to fill either one of these seats that are vacant.
Okay.
So. All right, other questions?
So Ron Davis is on there currently. Was he?
He was appointed by Joe Kemp last month. His very first meeting was last week with us.
Okay. But you said the director didn't want to appoint anybody else?
Not the second seat at this time.
Okay.
So what we would be voting on here won't fix that problem then? will it?
If the seat is, that second seat
yeah.
has been vacant for 1.5 years. So if this revision is approved, Fast Lane staff can appoint a citizen member to that seat.
An interim
Until
one?
such time, Joe Kemp would like to appoint the seat officially.
So it would, yeah, thank you.
We do have interested candidates that attend our meetings each month. They just don't, they participate, but they can't vote on action items. So they're present and they're up to speed, and 2 of the interested parties have previously served on the committee and would like to be back on. Other questions? Okay, seeing none, any public comment on this item today? Okay, there are no public comment. Can I get a motion for the 2 revisions and responsibilities documents with bike. Okay, thanks, Jacob. Is there a second? Sure, Brett. Got it. Okay, further discussion on this? Or any proposed revisions to the language as presented?
Hey, this is Danny Wallace. I do have to chime in. We've been trying to reach out and get someone, but really that's a Mayor Welch decision on our end. And he's out of the net right now. He's down in Anchorage. So given this, at least from the city of North Pole's perspective, we would like to delay the vote on this until we can get him, because I think that's in our best interest, but I just want to put that out there for the record.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. And this will go to the policy board. So Mayor Welch will be able to chime in person when it comes up on their agenda. Other discussion? Kevin, I see you unmuted yourself. Did you have a comment or discussion?
No, I was hit the mute button by mistake. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, further discussion? Okay, let's do the roll call then. The motion was to recommend to the policy board to consider approving the revisions to the roles and responsibilities document for the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee as presented. So we'll start out with Nick Zarnicki.
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Brett,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Bill,
Yes.
John Natardis,
Yes.
Kellen,
Yes.
RJ,
Yes.
Jacob. Yes. Danny
No.
and John Weinberger.
Yes.
All right, thank you, everybody. Motion passes. Okay, let's move on to our last action item, which is election of chair and vice chair. This is on page 46 in your packet. This is something that we do annually at our December technical committee and policy board meetings to elect a chair and vice chair from its regular committee members or fast-minded staff. This actually said no later than the end of November, so we're a few days late here. But anyways, this is before you, just kind of as a refresher. Again, nominations can be made by anybody on the committee. For chair and vice chair, we'll handle these separately. You can choose from any one of your fellow technical committee members or nominate yourself. And you can also choose to nominate as chair and or vice chair fast planning staff. The only difference is this: as staff, I cannot make motions or vote on any of the items brought before you. But as a committee member as well, if you serve as chair, you cannot make motions either, but you can still vote on all action items that are brought forward. So, and that's highlighted at the bottom there. The executive director of transportation planner will be considered as members and will not get a vote. So, if staff are selected, then we don't get a vote. But I think I've been chair for 5 or 6 years now. So, and I'm happy to continue to be chair if the committee so chooses. Again, or you can select other staff members or anyone that is a committee member at the table or online. So I'll open up the nominations.
Who is the vice chair currently?
I believe it's Olivia Lunsford, yeah, staff. So let's open up nominations for chair first. Go ahead, John.
I nominate Jackson Fox for chair.
Is there any other nominations for chair? Okay, we'll close the nominations for chair. Is there anyone opposed to myself continuing to serve as chair for the next year?
Do we get discussion?
Sure, you could be.
Can you oppose it? No.
I'll withdraw that, see if there's any discussion.
No, you've been doing great. I like you as chair. So, you know, you run the meetings really well, or come well informed and always have the packets and stuff ready. So thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, seeing no other discussion, anyone opposed to myself being appointed as chair for 2024? Okay, seeing no one opposed, you have a new chair. So thank you, everybody. All right, let's open up nominations for vice chair.
This is Michelle. I'd like to nominate Olivia as vice chair.
Okay, one nomination on the table. Is there another, are there any other nominations for vice chair?
Maybe a question.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't know if like Corey wants to try it out for a year or not. So I'll nominate him just in case.
Hold on a second. All right, so we have two nominations for chair.
Vice Chair.
Sorry, vice chair.
Good try.
Any other nominations? Okay, since there's two nominations, we might have to do secret ballot. I don't know how to do that with people online and in person. So let's open it up for, let's just open it up for discussion. I guess we can give time to Olivia and Corey to share their thoughts with us, whether they would like to serve as vice chair or not.
Sure, I mean, I've been happy to serve as vice chair. A break would be welcome, but it's really, no, I'm indifferent. I'm chair of BPAC now, so that's been a great learning experience, or vice chair of BPAC, but I've had to chair the last like half a year's worth of meetings, so it's been a great learning experience. So I do feel prepared to take on technical committee if something either were to happen and Jackson needed to leave, or if I needed to just fill in on a dime. So I do feel really prepared for this meeting space, but I also can see the benefit of it being a learning opportunity for my coworkers, so.
And I'm currently acting as vice chair for the PEC, the Project Enhancement Committee, and I'd be happy to be vice chair for this if you want to take a break. You don't have to thumb up.
Does that help anybody? Suggestions on how to handle this. Go ahead,
I'll
Bill.
just throw out there that I'm old and I don't like change.
Oh, okay, all right. That sounds like a vote for Olivia. Perfect. Are we okay by doing a roll call vote and you just say the name of your attendee, or do you, I mean, typically this would be handled through kind of secret ballot that we would look at, so nobody was called out as to who their favorite was at the table.
It's like getting picked for
So,
dodgeball.
again, I'm looking for suggestions on how folks think I should handle this. I'm not doing a very good job as chair right now, but
We, during
Go ahead.
COVID era, we set up, it was a third-party software, I forget the name, and everyone voted.
Menti or something like that.
One vote, and it worked, but obviously we're not gonna set that up the next 5 minutes.
No, we're not prepared.
I mean. shoebox.
Do we have to vote like twice, like? Put the
No,
nominee?
my idea was I'll go through the
No.
roll call list and I'm gonna call your name out and you have to say Corey or Olivia.
Well, no, here's where I find that to be a potential pitfall. We choose who the
I'm sorry.
one to bring forward is, but then the group has to have quorum on the one that eventually succeeds.
Well, it's just majority vote of the committee members that are present according to our bylaws.
Okay.
So it's. Any other, and that's my plan right now, unless anybody else has a better suggestion, because
How about in
this is just gonna be
the,
awkward, period.
in the name of experience, can I, refuse the proposal? How do I say that?
You can ask that your nomination be withdrawn.
I, in the interest of training Cory up, cross-training, I would like to remove finding from.
Okay. Let's see, Michelle, you nominated Olivia. You okay with Olivia?
No, we gotta nominate Deborah.
From the
In,
ballot?
in the, in the interests of training Cory, of course, absolutely.
Okay, we're just down to one nominee now. Which is Cory. Anyone opposed? All right, hearing no opposition. Sorry, Bill. Things are just gonna have to change. So Cory is officially our vice chair for 2024. All right. Thank you, everybody, for helping me work through that one. Appreciate the concession. All right, we'll move on to informational items, obligations, and offsets, which are on, again, on page 47 in the packet. Yay, we have one obligation so far this year, and that's for our household travel survey, in the amount of $100,000. As a result of that obligation, we have signed our contract with Replica to provide us origin and destination data across all travel modes across the entire world. So we'll have daily count data for vehicles, pedestrians, bicyclists, users of transit, freight vehicles. And sometime in 2024, once we get familiar with the software and the data set, we'll be doing a series of presentations to all of our committees on the usefulness of the data and how we intend to integrate this new data source into our next travel demand model update, which is also an update on that. We did get verbal approval at our last MPO, statewide MPO coordination meeting that the state will allow us to use $200,000 of the unobligated planning fund balance for the travel demand model update for our area. We're also using some funds for the travel demand model down in Matson and Anchorage, but that won't have to be a separate line item in the tip to do that. So again, we'll have $200,000 to do the travel demand model update, and this initial $100,000 will help with the data set that will go into that. And then for offsets, page 49, we do have one offset. It's about $50,000. The construction phase for the stage 3 design replacement project has been closed. So actually, the next, but actually shows it there too. And then last page of the packet is just our project closures list that we're tracking. Any questions on obligations and offsets? Go ahead, Kellen.
Just thinking about this in terms of conformity freeze, what are our offset options once the conformity freeze goes into effect?
So we can approve use of offsets without modifying our TIP. Okay. Typically, when we do TIP administrative modifications, like after a period of say 6 months, then we modify the TIP to show everything that we had previously approved. But we don't have to go through an admin mod or amendment process for use of offsets.
Sounds like sacred money. So just to clarify, if a project frees up $500,000 as an offset, project closes out, frees up $500,000, that can be applied to another project in the conformity freeze without an admin model.
As long as it's underneath, the thresholds that I described in the presentation. Okay. We typically don't receive a lot of offset money, or we haven't the last couple of years. So, because most of our projects cost more than what we programmed. Back in the day, we programmed more money than what they cost, and we got a lot of money back. We have not been in that situation the last few years with the new cost of construction. So these are small amounts. All right. Any other questions and obligations and offsets? Okay, hearing none. Any technical committee member comments? Go ahead, John.
I will be absent next month, and Lauren Little will be in my place.
Okay, all right. Thanks for the heads up. Yeah, Kellen?
Comment. I've brought it to this committee a couple of times. We have completed a draft of the comprehensive road plan. It is expected to be referred by the assembly officially next month. I've asked Jackson to put that on the next agenda for an official recommendation by this body and the policy board.
It'll be on the agenda for January. Any other technical committee member comments? Anyone online? Okay, seeing none. Get to go home early. Have a motion to adjourn. John, for a second. Brett? Anyone opposed? Hearing no one opposed, we are adjourned at 1:45 PM. So yeah, I never heard about it. Thanks, everyone.
Oh, well.